Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Project Gaia. JP here, and today we are not anywhere. We are in my apartment here in Brooklyn, New York City. So what we're doing today is a special. And this special is going to go into how the Latin Mass has renewed my faith. Now, this is a travel channel. If you're new to the channel and you just came across this because you were looking up Catholic stuff or information about the Latin Mass or anything like that, welcome. But this is a travel channel. Now, what we do on this channel is we go to places all over the world, but we also tend to go to a lot of very beautiful, historic Catholic churches. So I thought that my viewers might be interested in this, and if you are not one of my travel viewers, check out my travel videos as well, and you can see some of the most beautiful Catholic churches throughout the world, particularly in Europe. Anyways, I want to explain my journey into the traditional Latin Mass and how that has affected my faith, and some of the differences between the traditional Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo, which is the Mass that you go to now, and what makes it different, what makes one better than the other, what your preference might be, and you can compare and contrast and maybe visit it yourself and get involved in it. So over the last 6 months to 1 year, I've been going through a lot in life, a lot of changes, a lot of crazy things have been happening. So I'm at a point in life when I'm looking for something bigger. I think I was looking for something to give me answers, to help with some of the stuff I'm going through, and to connect to a spiritual presence. Now, I've always been a Catholic. I wouldn't call myself a Creaster. I didn't just go on Christmas and Easter. I went on Christmas and Easter, and then also sporadically throughout the year, maybe once a month, then I wouldn't go for like 3 weeks, then I'd go like 2 weeks in a row, then I would go for like 3 weeks in a row, then I wouldn't go for like 3 months. That kind of Catholic. I was born and raised in the Catholic Church. I went to Catholic school my whole life. So I'm very, very versed in the normal, also known as the Novus Ordo, Catholic Mass. So, I was at a point in life when, I wanted to understand the world and what was going on around me and try to connect to something for answers, like I mentioned. So I got into, different forms of spirituality. I was researching, not other religions, not as if I was going to change my religion, but just ways of thinking, and just kind of ways of being. Meditation I got really into, different exercises that can help manage stress and anxiety and just pain. And that's kind of when I came across the traditional Latin Mass. Now, I had heard of the Latin Mass. My grandparents told me that all the Masses were in Latin before the 1960s. So I had just assumed that it was just the normal Mass, the Novus Ordo Mass, in Latin, right? So there's, based on where you are, the demographics of your neighborhood, you can have Masses in Chinese, Spanish is very common, French, Italian, anything really, based on the demographics of the area that you're in, especially in the United States. So I thought it was just that. I thought it was just the normal Mass in Latin. So I never really had too much interest in going. But it is very different than the Novus Ordo or the modern Mass. It's very, very different. And I never knew that until I went into one. Interestingly, however, after the Novus Ordo, the Catholic Mass attendance began going down steadily up until today in 2024. So, a lot of people who are big supporters of the traditional Latin Mass believe that it is because the switch to the Novus Ordo, right? So the switch to the new Mass in the vernacular language. I would argue it's half that, personally, in my opinion, and then I would also argue that it's half just a changing world, with the internet and just our society is so narcissistic and worried about themselves and me, and my anxiety, my pain, my this, my that, and there's just a lack of community, and there's just, people are just kind of falling away from community and from spirituality and from something larger, from a bigger power. I mean, that people are just all focused on earthly matters and greed and making money and houses and parties and looking as good as they can on Instagram and whatever. And it's because of that. But a lot of people also believe that it has to do with the change in the Mass. And I'm going to explain why. So when you go to a Catholic Mass now, it could be very different based on where you are. There are more traditional churches and there are more modern churches. I tend to find that the older the neighborhood and the deeper into the city you are, the more traditional they tend to be. I notice when you go out into like kind of far-flung suburbs, they get very, very modern, almost Protestant-like. Not that that's a bad thing, just saying. So, you know, you're going to start to get guitars and tambourines, and you're going to get glory to God in the highest, which isn't a bad song. It's actually very catchy. You're going to get that more, right? And the Mass has become so casual and almost formulaic. I mean, you can feasibly go to a Mass and never get into a deep meditative state or a state of prayer because it is so kind of formulaic and there's so much interaction that you're never just there alone in your thoughts to think about connecting to God and connecting to Jesus and connecting to a higher power. You're just saying the motions. You're going through the motions. You're saying what the priest is supposed to say. Okay, at this point I say this. At this point I say this. You know, whatever. It's formulaic. You're not really into it, and it's kind of corny, right? I mean, think about it. So I'm dare to say it. Some of the songs are corny, and some of the stuff they say is corny. You know, so I think it's kind of turned people off. In recent years, people are kind of like, it's boring. I don't really want to go. They just do what they say. It's very robotic almost. So, you know, you're getting this fall off. Now, you compare that to the Latin Mass, you're going to get an extremely different vibe. So, instead of and it's really preference, because some people prefer the Novus Ordo because you're interacting more and you feel more connected to it. Interestingly, people find that women and children like it more. Men tend to like the Latin Mass better. And young people tend to like the Latin Mass better. I'm going to explain why. So when you are in a traditional Latin Mass, you are in a solemn state. Okay, and the reason you're in a solemn state is because you have the traditional music and Gregorian chants. I mean, instead of like glory to God in the highest, you get like and it's very like deep and spiritual, and it brings you into this place, this mystical spiritual place that's really hard to explain until you go there. So what I think, at least this is my story, and I think this is true of a lot of young people. A lot of young people, meaning people, you know, under 40, have moved to kind of more new agey religions. You know, they're into meditation. They say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. They've moved into Buddhism. They've moved into parts of Hinduism, even some neo-paganism, because they want to feel a real spiritual meditative connection to something larger than themselves, a higher power, an afterlife, connection to their ancestors, a connection to God. And these religions provide that. When you made the Catholic Church so formulaic, so just something you go to, so casual, you've really taken the spirituality and the seriousness out of it. You're going to see as well people dress a lot more formal, right? So like women and little girls will be veiled. Men will be dressed in slacks and dress shoes and like a dressier shirt. Women will be in dresses, and little girls will be in dresses too. You're not going to see like you see in a normal Mass. I mean, I see people going in sweats sometimes, which is ridiculous and abhorrent. If you go in sweats, don't do that. Come on. But you're going to see a much more dedicated, deep, and serious spiritual community. And I think that's what appeals to people. People don't want to hear tambourines and guitars and all that stuff. People want to be connected to the spiritual, deep, meditative nature of their religion, of their spirituality, of their soul. And that's really what the Latin Mass, the old traditional Mass, does. With their, they use a lot of incense too, so you have the smells, you have the Gregorian chants, you have the choir, you have the priest speaking in the sacred, beautiful, ancient Latin language that is just foreign, so foreign where it puts you into a meditative state. A lot of people argue that they didn't like the Latin Mass because they didn't know what the priest was saying, right? But do you have to know what he's saying? I mean, think about it. If you're always following along, if you're always listening, almost like a radio or television, right? If you're always listening, you're not really getting into the point of prayer. You're not connecting spiritually. You're just listening to what they're saying, like a story or like a radio broadcast, right? Since you don't know the language and it's this sacred, ancient kind of cool sounding language, right? It brings you into the meditative state, and it's sung too. Well, there's two types. So I'm going to explain the two types to you. There is a low Latin Mass, which is completely quiet. So it's like very quiet. There's no singing. There's usually a priest and one altar server. And then you'll know that you're in a low Mass because there'll be 2 candles lit. Then there's also a high Mass. The low Mass is good for, like, if something's going on in your life and you really just want to meditate and be deep in prayer and be quiet, right? And just be in the silence and the beauty to connect your soul to God, right? That's the low Mass, okay? The high Mass is the one with the Gregorian chants, the choir, the bells, the incense everywhere. That's the one that's really, truly beautiful and connective. So whatever your intentions are, go with the low Mass or the high Mass. The low Mass is a little sadder. The high Mass is a little bit more just glorious and beautiful, is how I would compare the two. Next, the priest isn't really going to talk to you, right? So when you go to a Novus Ordo Mass, the priest is talking to you. He gives a homily. He gives you the sermon. He talks about, how the Bible verses and the liturgy connects to your life, which is great. I actually like that part of it a lot. I think it's pretty interesting. It helps you understand, what this all means and how it connects to you, which is pretty cool. You're not going to get that in the Latin Mass because it's going to be in Latin, and a lot of it is sung, right? It's just a much more meditative, spiritual place. So I'm not knocking the Novus Ordo Mass at all. I think it has its place, and I think it's good, and I don't think it's wrong. It's bad to go to them. I just prefer the Latin Mass. I think it's more interesting. I think it really gets deeper into your soul. Like when I go to Mass, I don't want to, if I'm going to get up and go and do all that, I'm not going to want to go to something where I'm being a robot and being formulaic and saying what you're supposed to say and just repeating stuff. And I mean, sometimes people in like with newspapers and phones in church, right? You're not going to see that in the Latin Mass. Those people are serious. These people are here to pray. These people are here to connect. These people are here to disconnect from the modern world. They are there to go to a tradition that has been going on during medieval times for millennia, thousands of years, right? History people are going to love it, right? Because you feel like you're in almost like like a medieval monastery, right? So if you love history, particularly medieval history, it's going to be right up your alley. And it really brings you to a very amazing, meditative, beautiful state. And I think that the Catholic Church should, if anybody's watching this that is a clergy member or anybody high up in the Vatican, I know I do have some subscribers from Italy, I really encourage you to bring back the traditional Latin Mass because so many young people are interested in it. I mean, you see a lot of people under 40 in it. People want to connect in a spiritual way. I hate to say it, the Latin Mass is not corny at all. It is cool. It is deep. It's like legendary. It's mystical. It's almost magical. And that's what people like. That's what people want. People don't want to go to some corny thing with somebody playing a guitar and talking about bingo afterwards. I mean, let's get real, right? And, you know, it's very hard to find a Latin Mass. I live in New York City, which is the biggest city in America and one of the biggest cities in the world, and it's not easy to find. I'm going to leave a link below. It's a very helpful site, and it's called latinmass.org, I think, or Latin Mass something. I'll leave it below. And what it does is it allows you to search by your zip code, and you can find all of the parishes that offer the Latin Masses. And it's usually only once a week. I found one in Manhattan in New York that offers it every day, which is really cool. But most do not offer them very often, and it's not going to be every church. You might have to travel a little bit. But I really encourage you to check it out, and it is going to be worth your travel. And I really hope and urge, like I said, if any clergy members are on here or anybody from the Vatican is watching this, to open up the traditional Latin Mass. Not saying the Novus Ordo is bad or that, you know, that's wrong, or I don't want to sound like a heretic, but allow people to choose the type that they prefer. A lot of people will prefer the Latin Mass, I guarantee you, and it is growing. So guys, that was my take on the traditional Latin Mass. I encourage you to check it out, whether you're Catholic or even anything else. I'm not trying to evangelize you or anything, but it is a very spiritual moving journey, and it connects you to history, and it's, you know, the same Mass from 1,000 years ago. It's very, very interesting. Okay, guys, until next time, take care, and if you have any questions about the Latin Mass at all, any at all, leave them below. If you want to tell our community about your experience with the Latin Mass, please do below as well. Also, I'm going to leave a link below that explains it in greater detail. There's a fabulously amazing documentary that teaches you all about the Latin Mass. It's called Mass of the Ages.